At the end of chapter 6, we talked about taking our data and putting it into more of a visual display using things like frequency tables, histograms, line plots, and then we also talked about once it's in those visual displays of our data, what does the shape look like? And then we tried to describe the shape. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I'm going to start with a frequency chart or a frequency table. Up here is my data that I collected. So I'm pretending that I went around to a bunch of students and I asked them how many dogs they have. And then I recorded how many dogs each student has. So for example, the first 3 students I asked, the first one had 1 dog, the second one had 1 dog, and the third one had 3 dogs. So when I was finished, this was the data that I collected. Now I'm going to put this into a frequency table because it just looks a little bit cleaner and a little more organized. So I'm going to start from the very beginning, and every time I see the number, I'm going to tally under that column. So here's the number 1, I'll tally under 1. I have another student that had 1 dog. I have a student that has 3 dogs. A student has 2 dogs. Another one with 1. And you just go through until you have put every single one in your frequency chart. One has 4, 1, 3, 2 have 0 right in a row, and another one has 2. So you can kind of see a little bit quicker. When I look at this, I don't really know how many right off the bat have 2. But when I look at this, these tallies make it a lot easier. So I can say, oh, 5 students said that they have 2 dogs at home. 1 student said they had 6. 4 students said they had 0, or I had that wrong. 6 students said they have 1 dog, 4 said that they have 0, and 1 said that they had 4. So I'm going to write that down because I don't need this anymore. I have it all here in my frequency table. And I'm going to record that for later when I'm going to be making my histogram, because we can use the frequency charts to create our histogram. Okay. This is not the only way that you can construct your frequency table. This is the way I prefer to, but some people like to have their title on the top and then they go through and let's say I was doing, I asked their students their favorite animal. And I got a bunch of responses, but so I was asking favorite animal. And say out of all the responses that I got several responses, but the only animals I got were like cat, dog, fish, horse, and maybe somebody favorite animal was a deer. I don't know. And then I would go through and tally every time I saw a cat, every time I saw a dog, every time I saw a fish, and so on. So you can kind of construct it this way as well. You can also do intervals. So usually we make we take our frequency chart that recorded intervals, and an interval is like a range of numbers from so say my interval is 0 to 10. Then my next one is 11 to 21. Those are intervals, and then we create a histogram. Typically histograms are, I'll show you in a little bit what they are, but they're used with intervals or made using intervals. So an example of an interval type would be, I'll use the example that I did here. And we'll say, how about 0 to 2 and 3 to 4 is my intervals. Obviously that's not as nice as one that we did in class, but just to refresh your memory, then I would go through that long list, and every time I saw a number in between 0 and 2, I would tally. And every time I saw a number 3 and 4, I would tally. So that would be an interval. You can do that when the numbers are very spread apart In this case, I don't have to do that because my numbers are fairly close together. Alright, moving on to a histogram. A histogram is kind of like a bar graph, except the bars touch, and typically, like I was trying to say before, we use them to record like intervals of something. I'm not going to use it for that. I'm just going to use this to give you an example. So let's say how many students had 0 pets, how many students have 1, how many students have 2, how many students have 3, and finally how many students have 4 dogs is what my data collection was. And the highest number I have is 6, so I'm just going to go by ones. It's not too terribly hard. Sometimes when your numbers are really spread apart, you might have to count up by 5s or by 10s. 6, 7. Okay. Now I'm going to look. How many students had 0? I can see that 4 of my students had 0 pets. How many had 1 pet? 6, or dog, sorry. 6 had 1 dog. How many had 2 dogs? 5 did. How many had 3 dogs? 3 did. And how many had 4 dogs? 1 of my students had 4 dogs. So you can kind of see that they're all touching, and then I can look at that right away and say, okay, I know that most of the students have 1 dog. The majority of my class who have dogs have like 1 dog. So that's a histogram. Trying to think if there's anything I'm missing there. I think that covers it. A line plot, you've made these before in past years. So I'll just give you a quick example. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a lot like a frequency chart because essentially you're kind of tallying here. So I would go through, if I was still like jumbled up here, which it's not, I wrote it on the side, but if it was, I would go through, I think the first 2 numbers were like a 1. So I'd go 1, 1, and then the third one was a 3, so I would go there, and then you would work your way through the line, putting X's as you go. There's 6 here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, and 1. So this is my data here. You can kind of see it's making a triangular shape here. When it's kind of even in the middle, where it's kind of working its way down, looks kind of even, that's described as a normal shape. So there's 2 ways to describe data here. I have normal and I have skewed as my option. How I like to think of it is basically if it looks clean and tidy, it's considered normal. So here, this is making almost a perfect triangle. I would have this side obviously, but this side is pretty even going all the way down. So that one would be normal. Let me give you an example of skewed, and I'm going to try to fit on the bottom here so we can compare them side by side. So let's say I went through a list of data and I had maybe I had 4 kids, 4 students say they had 0 dogs, and then I had some kids saying that they had 6, let's say I had 3, and I only had 1 say that they had 3 dogs, and we'll say like 3 did, 4. So you can kind of see how this is more spread out and it doesn't look as clean as like this is making kind of like a pyramid, where this just seems all over the place. So that's why this is called skewed. An example of, we just did box and whisker plots, so I just kind of want to show you box and whisker plots. A normal one would look like this more so, and a skewed one would look something like this. where there's something kind of throwing the data off and it's not really as clean as, say, this looks pretty neat and tidy, and this one you can tell there's data way out here that doesn't fit with the bulk of the data that's happening right here. So this is an example of skewed, and this would be an example of normal again. I really rushed through that, and it was kind of wordy. So if at any point you're like, I am so lost, or you want me to make you, maybe you're like, okay, I get frequency chart, but histogram didn't make any sense to me, please let me know so I can schedule a Google Meet with you or do some other form to help you out.